Hi, everyone. We're starting sort of like stage phase two of the Black Freedom Struggle unit with this series of videos. Last phase was the Black art and resistance from 1890 to 1940-ish during the Jim Crow era. So check out that series of videos if you haven't already. For this series, we're going to be diving deeply into the Black freedom struggle of the 20th century up through and connecting to today. So let's go. This will be the introductory video where I'll just talk about unit questions and frameworks. So just like we always do, our unit questions deal with larger key themes of the course. So we're going to look at the ways in which U.S. policies continue to oppress Black communities, and we'll connect that to communities of color and poor white communities as well, economically, socially, and politically in the 20th century. We're going to look at the ways in which Black communities, communities of color, and white communities built power and solidarity and fought for liberation. We'll look at how specifically at the civil rights movement and the nonviolent campaigns of the civil rights movement, and ask the question, how successful was nonviolent direct action in furthering the cause of Black liberation in the U.S.? This is actually this is the question for the final source-based essay exam. And then we look at overall the extent to which the total history of the U.S. represents continuity or change for Black communities. And this could deal with continuity or change of oppression, continuity or change of resistance, or continuity or change of culture and cultural expression. And so there's a variety of ways that we could answer that. But we want to as historians, we want to pay attention to the way in which we often get a narrative of racial progress in this country, and we want to evaluate the extent to which that's true. I mean, obviously it's true to some extent in the sense that we don't have chattel slavery, but we also want to pay attention to continuity, right? To what extent is mass incarceration a consequence of the continuing patterns of white supremacist racialized discrimination in this country? And so we want to pay attention to that. We want to pay attention to resistance. Did the continuity or change of different forms of resistance over time. And then we're going to look at more Black art as well, always bringing that piece of art and culture into it. So frameworks for this unit. We want to have an understanding of the term organize or organizing. Now, we're not talking about organizing your planner or your notebook. We're talking about organizing when it comes to social change. And so you can see here, if you wanted to pause and kind of try and figure out what the difference between these two images are, that serves as a little bit of a metaphor for efforts to organize people to change society. So, you have here, obviously, big scary fish eating fish. When they're running away and scattered and not working together, it's easy for that big fish to pick them off. But united and bringing in more fish, smaller fish into the they can fight off, right? And so that's sort of just a little bit of a metaphor and kind of an image metaphor for organizing. I think it'll continue to make sense as we build the definition. So organizing is the process of expanding one's base, meaning base of support, by bringing together people most affected by whatever the issue is, to build solidarity. The goal is unbreakable solidarity, and use that collective power to win lasting improvements in people's lives and to change the power structure. Organizing is one way of trying to bring about change to improve people's lives. There's other ways, right? Sometimes people volunteer and do community service. Okay, so that's kind of level one, right? Doing community service, volunteering can benefit people's lives in the immediate sense. That might be, volunteering to give blood or volunteering at a nursing home or something like that. And then there's advocacy, right? So lobbying government, advocating on behalf of a community, that can help bring about legal changes and policy changes. There's mobilizing. So there's a lot of people who already agree with people who are trying to change things. Get them out, mobilize them on a march or a protest or something like that to try and win lasting improvements. Organizing is trying to expand that base of support, talking to people who might not initially have agreed or might be on the fence, and bringing in new folks and building up leadership. Right? Mobilizing doesn't build new leaders. Organizing is trying to build new leaders. So the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, it's about mobilizing and organizing. And advocacy too, but we're going to focus on kind of these two aspects, mobilizing and organizing. So frameworks for our study of the Black freedom struggle. There's a few things I want to highlight here. So there are different visions for Black liberation. One way to break down this vision is through integrationism versus nationalism and separatism. There's other ways, right? We could talk about visions for social equality, political equality, economic equality. That's one way to break down the vision for Black liberation, is on those various fronts. There's another way here, which is this kind of seemingly contradictory claims for integrationism or separatism. So there's a long history for both of these visions of liberation. We've studied Frederick Douglass, we've studied Radical Reconstruction, Ida B. Wells, Du Bois, the NAACP. They all represent this integrationism vision in the United States towards integrating with American society, white society, dominant society, and building spaces where folks are seen as equals and treated as equals by the policies that exist. That is really captured well with Dr. King and Ella Baker. But there's also a separatism vision or nationalism vision represented in figures in some of the previous stuff we've studied, like the Great Dismal Swamp, right? That was not about integrating with white society, but enslaved people escaping and living separately. Choice, not segregation. We discussed the difference when we were talking about the Savannah Colloquy, for example, where Black folks asked for separate space to live from General Sherman at the tail end of the Civil War in the area around South Carolina, Georgia. And so that was a vision for separatism. David Walker's vision, Nat Turner's vision, those who kind of rebelled at the time. Malcolm X captures that vision quite well. The Republic of New Africa, RNA, also captures that vision. We'll talk about them later. Now, this is not mutually exclusive. King was a leader of a Black church. So even within integrationism, there's still separatist values. King certainly wasn't advocating to necessarily integrate churches, although he did work, and urged white clergy to support the civil rights movement. He knew there was value in having Black spaces. So I don't want to draw too stark a line between these two, but we do want to name them. We will continue to use the framework of segregationism, assimilationism, and anti-racism from Dr. Kendi. I don't feel the need to redefine that because we've been doing that all year long. We will also be looking at the degree of continuity and change over time. I mentioned that in the unit questions. Finally, the power violence analysis. We're going to come back to this diagram from Unit 1, where we analyzed how institutional power can be used to create structural violence which harms oppressed groups who can use their collective power in numbers to challenge structural violence. At that point, dominant groups have a choice, right? Do they use their power to make changes to improve people's lives, or do they use their power to enact physical and coercive violence and repress collective power? We will see this in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, this dynamic. And we'll see dominant groups do both, right? Use their coercive power and also use their power to make changes. So that's the opening framework and introduction to the Black freedom struggle I wanted to offer you. You can move on to the next video on the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters for video lesson number 2.